Yeah, it's all right, man. I've just been working. I've been wrapping up the Third Girls in Synthesis album as well. So yeah, quite busy really, to be fair. How about you?
Yeah, same old, really. Just plugging away with the podcast. Yeah, I saw you going on like a European tour this summer. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
right?
yeah. So yeah, May. The album comes out I think the first week of May, and then the week after we go, we do four what are we doing? 6 gigs in the UK and then 2 weeks in the EU, basically. So yeah, it's going to be busy, and hopefully we're all talking to each other at the end of it, you know. So
Yeah, you must be a bit of a veteran at this point now, I guess.
yeah, but funnily enough, I mean, like only in the last, sort of 3 or 4 years, really, because we were supposed to be touring the EU during COVID, and obviously that blocked it all off. And before that would have been with NC, and we didn't do a proper tour. I think the last proper tour I did with those children would have been like 2007, eight. So
Right.
it's quite a big gap in between, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, you play in Manchester, so I'll have to come and see you if I
Yeah,
can.
yeah, we're doing the Castle Hotel again, which we're
Yeah, it's quite
a
a cool
fan of
venue, isn't
that
it?
venue because it's so small and it's really good, and the sound's always good as well. So yeah, come along. Yeah, if you just send me a message and I'll put you on the list or something.
Oh, cheers, mate. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. That's cool.
So how does it work with like bringing albums out now then? Is it kind of a self-produced thing or how does it work?
So essentially, yeah, we record, we make the album basically, and then we've got a deal with Cargo, who are like a big distribution company in the UK and Europe actually. They pay for the record to be pressed, and then once we've made the costs of the album back, then we split the profits basically. So it's quite a good deal, really. I mean, there's not much in the way of like the infrastructure, i.e., like press and stuff like that. That's we have to deal with all that. But the percentage cut that we get from them is just you just wouldn't get it anywhere else. So it means that we're in control as well. So it's like we only put out what we want to put out. They don't interfere at all. So it seems to work for us, to be fair.
Yeah. And then do you like subscribe to the usual stuff like the streaming and stuff, or do you try and avoid that?
No, 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 we're on everything. We try and do it, because I know, as a consumer traveling to work every day, and I know it's just easier, isn't it, to listen to music on Spotify. So I don't see the point in trying to. I mean, do I think that they should do a better deal for artists? 100%. But is that, is it going to go anywhere anytime soon? Definitely not. So I think that you have to you have to be able to access for people, which is why Brandon's been putting all of the Neil's Children stuff up on the streaming platforms as well, because it's the way people consume music now, and whether or not you like it, um, that's just the way it is, really, isn't it? So yeah, I
Yeah.
like it. I think it's really, as I say, as a consumer, as a user, it's really amazing having all this music available to listen to online. It's just the money thing, but that's just the way the world is now, isn't it? You don't get fair pay for sort of being a musician anymore, essentially.
No, it does seem like even like bands with a lot of attention or a lot of hype as it were, like they still have to have
Yeah.
part-time jobs type thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about it quite a lot because obviously well, Neil's Children, we were sort of on the tail end of, you know, the music industry still, working as a band, still being a viable job, but I mean, I think streaming and social media, and then obviously the death of the music press sort of changed everything. And yeah, I mean, bands are not selling records in the quantities that they were. Um, so record labels they don't have the money, whether or not they could actually put their hands in their pockets a bit. I don't know, but that's why you see so many bands on tour all the time now. I think because that's the only way you can really earn money. We wouldn't really be able to sell the record unless we were playing gigs. And it never used to be like that back in the day. I mean, with Neil's Children, we never sold records in like huge quantities, but the live thing was very much word of mouth, and it didn't really seem to make much difference whether you had a record out or not. You know, it was one of those strange things. But yeah, I think the gigging's like it's the primary money spinner for bands now, I think.
Yeah, what do you make of like, like say the massive bands, the likes of, I mean, even Radiohead side projects, apparently it's 60 quid a ticket to see them. Do you think that's justified or not really?
Um, well, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm a huge Blur fan, and I saw them at Wembley this year, and the tickets for that were expensive. But I think now, I think the reason the prices are higher is because they're trying to make up the shortfall from not really selling records anymore, not getting the income from the revenue stream from actually selling records. So I think it's and let's be honest about it. I mean, especially with bigger bands, the stage show aspect of it is it's way more professional than back in the day.
Mm.
Like with the amount of technology they use to, have visuals and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I guess it goes into that as well. But then saying that at Blur, it was like fucking 35 quid a t-shirt, which is, yeah,
Wow.
then you really do think to yourself, like, yeah, where's that money going? But at the same, but I think it all comes down to the bottom line is that these guys are not earning money from, they can't sit at home and the records just, it's a stream of income from the back catalogue selling. They have to go out there and tour. And also, you've got to remember that all those guys, let's even go back just as far as like the 90s and the 2000s, or maybe, the 80s as well. All their money that they earn from selling like, 200,000 records, it's all gone. It's
Mm.
all they've spent it. So essentially, I guess they have to make the income from somewhere. And I think that's why people are touring for longer now. I mean, I think it's, Blur were amazing, and they're my favorite band, so they weren't a disappointment. But I can imagine if you go and see some bands, when you look at the Stones, I mean, I'm not knocking them or anything, but you look at them and you do think maybe it might be time to sort of give it up because it all looks a bit silly to me. But maybe that's me just being ageist, I don't know. If they're still enjoying it and the fans want to see it, then who knows? It's down to the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
No, I know what you mean, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, mate. Well, obviously asked you to come on to pick your favorite songs of the 2000s.
yeah,
So the first one we've got, I mean, quite a few names I didn't recognize it, but it's quite good being able to listen to them all. So like listening to new
yeah,
music for me. But the first one, Martini Henry Rifles with Mono Basic. What can you tell
yeah.
us about this?
So basically, what I've tried to do with these is I've tried to because I know last time we spoke, I was telling you how varied the scene was in its early days, and how it sort of came a little bit of disappointment to me, sort of post 2005 2006. So every band started sounding quite similar. So I've tried to pick songs that are pre 2005. I think there's a couple that are from 2005, but everything else generally is earlier in that period. I've tried to pick bands that I've seen live as well. So there's only two of these bands that I haven't seen live. So all these other bands I've seen live multiple times. And the Martinis really, like all of these bands, they were just an incredible live group. Like that was a big thing for me back in the day. Neil's Children was primarily a live band. So I always thought it was important to be good live, and to have an intensity and to project like an energy. And the Martini Henry Rifles, I caught them like a lot, like 4, 5, 6 times. And they were never the biggest band of the period, but I always thought they were one of the more interesting bands because they were influenced by sort of like Brainiac and Arab on Radar and this really strange independent alternative American music. It had a bit of Britishness to it, but I think generally it was quite hard to pin down. And their live shows were just insanely intense, and I think a lot of these bands I caught like on a Sunday night, um, like a weird gig. Gigs always used to be on Sundays, and I don't know why. Um, but yeah, so I think I caught them. It was like a Sonic Mook experiment all day at the Astoria or the LA2, and it was Suicide, Liars, Martini Henry Rifles, and someone else. And I was like hungover. I hadn't really been to bed. It was like Sunday evening. I was knackered. I was like, I just cannot be bothered for this. And I think they were the opening band. And yeah, it just blew me away. Really, they sort of looked a bit like we did in the early days. They're really, really raucous on stage, and you couldn't really put your finger on like where the influences were coming from. I mean, they had that Brainiac thing going, but there was so much more to it than that. They never quite. A lot of these bands that I'm going to play tonight, they never quite hit the big time, or what we would consider, to be a big band. But I mean, the Martinis at least they did release an album. I think this version of this song is from their debut album, Super Bastard, which came out in 2004. They did some great singles before that, and they sort of split up quite soon after this album came out. I think the drummer left, moved to Australia, um, and yeah, so they never quite got what I felt, the recognition they deserved. However, it does mean that we can look back on it now and we're not really jaded by them being like on everything or at every show. So yeah, I mean it's a great like furious piece of music, and I'd say that anyone who's into that sort of that sort of Brainiac, maybe like American influence noise rock thing should definitely check it out.
Okay, cool. Well, here's Martini Henry Rifles with monobasic. Hey, I won't be playing them tonight, mate. I don't know if I mentioned that,
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine. Yeah. We'll be here all night, right?
but cool. Right. Well, the next one, Twisted Charm. I definitely heard of these. I also think I've seen a few of these names on the playlist that you sent me before. Is it Not Shit
Yes,
2000s or
yeah,
something?
that's it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, they're another band which I caught. I caught them supporting someone from like a US band. There was a really good venue in central London at the time called Metro's. It was right next to Sultan Court Road tube station. They've knocked it down now for the Crossrail, which is really sad. Um, but I used to go there all the time. We used to play there quite a lot. It was quite a small venues, maybe like 300 capacity, and we never often went early to go and see support bands, but we did that night for some reason. And I remember they were about a quarter of the way into their set, and they looked really cool. The singer Nathan, he had like a sort of ripped shirt on, sort of punk, like early punk style, a little bit like Buzzcocksy or like Dead Boys or whatever, television sort of thing. And they were playing. They had a saxophonist, which was really like unique anyway. So he was like wailing away in one corner, and then um, Nathan, the guitarist, was playing his guitar through like a harmonizer, which is quite a common thing now. People use them all the time, but back then they weren't that common, and it made it sound like an organ. And I remember just standing at the front of the stage, and it wasn't like that busy at that period, but I mean, a venue, it was only sort of like 100 people in there, or whatever. And I remember standing at the front of the stage and just hearing this guitar that didn't sound like a guitar and trying to work out where the keyboard player was. And I remember I watched the rest of the set and I just thought, like, this is amazing. They had a really, really good sound. Like, quite unique, really. It was almost like they could only sort of do one thing, but what they could do was just like completely unique to them. They had like a drummer who played like a sort of jungle drummer, like a breakbeat sort of thing, and he played this drum beat all the time at various sort of tempos. But it was just like the best drum beat for their music. Nathan's voice was quite androgynous. It reminded me a lot of Pete Shelley from the Buzzcocks. Quite yelpy, and the bass player reminded me a lot of like JJ Burnell from the Stranglers, or Steve Hanley from the Fall. Like really simple, but just pounded. Played really really hard. And obviously you had Luke, the sax player, just doing his like free jazz thing over the top of it. And you'll get a lot of these bands that we're going to play. I basically sort of even though I was in a band, I was just a music fan, really. So, I was obsessed with these bands, and probably a bit like quite embarrassingly fanboyish towards a lot of them. I'd always try and speak to them and tell them how much I loved their music and stuff because, even though we were in what was considered a cool band, or we were a great band, Neil's Children, I still I was still a fan. I still wanted to know what these guys were about. I still wanted to know where they were from, why they made the music they made, sort of what they were going to be doing next. So, I actually became friends with a few of these bands. And Twisted Charm, we became quite close to, really. We played a lot with them. Um, and yeah, we never really saw each other as competition. There wasn't that aspect of it early on. I don't know whether there was later because we were a bit aloof from the scene after the mid 2000s, really. But there was a lot of like putting each other on at shows and doing our own nights and getting a bill of like all of our favorite bands together and hanging out and talking about our songs and yeah, listen for this one tonight. It's a new one. So I always thought they were great. Really, really, really good. I think they're from Northampton originally, although like there's three of them that were. I don't know if Luke was. Don't think he was. And I think early on they just had something that no one else had. They were really, really original. And I think the only thing that they suffered from, and it's only my view. It's not meant to be a criticism. Is that they tended to write their songs more than once. So they'd do a song and then they'd change it, change the lyrics, change the arrangement. So you'd have songs like that they played early on and demos that they gave me and like 2 or 3 years later that come out on something with like completely different lyrics. And I think sometimes when people do that, they lose the impetus of the original track. So all of the songs that they rewrote, I always think about them as like how they originally were to me. So the song Dreams that you're going to play, I think that turned into something else, but I always just think that this is the definitive version of that song. So, I mean, we in Neil's Children, and even now I work completely opposite to that. So if something doesn't work straight away, then I tend to just scrap it and move on. But they did, play around with changing the arrangements and lyrics to their songs a lot. And I think sometimes it works, and sometimes I think the original is the best. But yeah, I mean, they did an album. I think it was sort of the late 2000s. It might have been 2006 or seven. And I think the one thing that a lot of bands like us, I'd put us in this box as well, is that the bands who were slightly early, so late 90s onwards, I think Twisted Charm were part of that. They started in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think because that was before the scene broke, when we'd sort of opened the doors for the bands that were to come later, we were sort of the last bands that labels wanted to sign, really, because we'd been around the block and oh yeah, they've been going a few years, haven't they? Neil's Children, oh yeah, they started ages ago. I remember seeing them here and there. So a lot of labels, I think, thought we were sort of sullied goods in a way. So by the time we all came to make our first record, which was probably 4, 5, 6 years after we'd started, I think we were almost on the back foot a little bit and maybe then trying to be a bit more contemporary with what was going on. Whereas I think a lot of the, Twisted Charm, us, we should have made an album at a peak, which was, early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4. Should have made an album then. But, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But I think their album's really good. The one they released, it's called Real Fictional. It's got sort of keyboards on it, which I'm not 100% sure works all the time. But, I think, again, they were probably just trying to change the mold of their music after being together for so long, sort of like we did as well with Pop Oral. But yeah, I mean, it's great. They were quite a rowdy band to be around, and I had some great times with them. And I still talk to John, the bass player, occasionally. And yeah, another band really that maybe should have more recognition.
Okay, cool. Well, here they are. Here's Twisted Charm with Dreams. And then the next song is probably my favorite that you sent over.
Yeah.
Selfish Cunt, Authority,
Yeah,
Confrontation.
you don't.
Um,
You said cunt really quietly then, like your nan was in the room. Selfish cunt. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
don't
know
know why
whether
it
you were
seems a
going
bit
to
of a
say
mad thing
that.
to say on a podcast, but
It is weird, yeah, but it's a great name. Like that
yeah.
name is like perfect for that band, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot about them on the podcast. I never got to see them, but how good were they?
Well, again, I'm going back quite early with this band. It's another band who had quite a long shelf life, really, but they changed again. Early on, it was just Martin, the singer. I can't remember the guitarist's name now, which is annoying, and a drum machine. So, I mean, it was really unique for that period. You had a lot of bands, traditional lineups like us and Twisted Charm or whoever, guitars and stuff and bass and drums. And they sort of stripped everything down to like a really basic, minimal setup. And it sort of made it even more confrontational and intense than if they'd have been a proper band, which they later turned into. They had a drummer and a bass player and a guitarist, and it never had quite the same impact for me. I always felt that. Sorry, I always felt that it was the most intense when it was just the two of them, and yeah, I mean they were amazing. They released an album quite early on, and they captured, which is what I was talking about earlier, is they captured that intensity of their early period. They caught that dynamism. They caught that dynamic aspect of how they were when they started, and I think it was produced by Barry Seven from Ad N2X, I think anyway. And it's no frills, this album. It's really really raw, really basic, really distorted, and it kept. I mean, live they were just Martin was just like a force to be reckoned with as a frontman, really. I mean, he just did not care, I don't think. I think he felt he needed to challenge the audience in order for them to not only listen to the band, but also take it seriously, because I guess, there's an element of maybe it might be a little bit novel if there's just two people and a drum machine, but they really made it work. And it's quite frightening, really, to listen to their early stuff. It's on the edge all the time, I think, of falling apart a little bit and becoming maybe slightly too inward looking. But I just don't think you can beat it. They after this album come out, I think it sort of changed. I think maybe they did another year in that lineup, and then it sort of got added to bit by bit. I remember them getting a drummer, and then they got a bassist, and yeah, it became more traditional for me. And I always like the sort of antithesis of that, which is their early period. But I mean, for challenging, intense music of that period, I think they're really hard to beat.
No, yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
So here's Selfish Cunts with Authority, Confrontation. And then the next one was interesting because I've heard a fair bit about Liars, like they were featured in the Meet Me in the Bathroom stuff, and you
Yeah.
hear good things. It's never a band that I got into, but yeah, why did he choose this one?
Again, it's another band that I've seen live quite a lot. There was a period in the early 2000s where I don't know who was bringing bands over, but you get a lot of American bands. I mean, not a lot, especially in comparison to today. A lot of smaller or upcoming bands coming and touring. Um, and I don't know why it happened at that time, whether there was a particular, like it was particularly easy to get a visa, or whether it was cheaper to travel, or whether there was a good link up for each of those bands, label wise in the UK. I'm not really sure, but we'd go and see a lot of bands from the US, and Liars were one that I probably caught about 5 or 6 times. And again, they were a band that their lineup sort of they had a more traditional lineup: drums, bass, guitar, singer, for a few years, and I saw that incantation. I saw that incarnation of them maybe 2 or 3 times, and then two of the band left, the bassist and the drummer, and they didn't replace the bassist. They got another drummer, and then I remember them coming over slightly later, 2003, 2004. They had an album out called what was it called? Like If You're a Witch. Can't remember. It's got witch in the title. It's their second album, and that's really really amazing. Like abstract, left field, sort of quite ambient, really. Um, but there was a period between their first album. They threw us in a trench and stuck a monument on the top, which was more like dance punk, really. And the second album, which was more experimental. There was a period where they sort of were in between. You could tell they had the traditional lineup, but they were trying to take it out from being just a sort of traditional structure of a song. So that's basically what this song is, in my opinion. It's that sort of middle ground. So very, very almost housey, disco-y rhythms, loads of weird sound effects. We used to play this at Junk, which was a night that me, Reese, and Oliver did in Southend in the early 2000s. And this was like a big track for us to play because it's so danceable and but really, really intense and just sort of insane, really. I think this came out on Mute. I think that was their label at the time, and Mute signed up quite a lot of these type of bands. And yeah, as I say, just saw them live a lot. It's eventually what happened, I think, to them is members sort of dropped out bit by bit, and I think the only guy in the band now is the singer Andrew. I think that's his name, and I think it's more of like a solo project for him. But their sound has changed over the years quite a lot. So maybe like you might have heard a specific thing from a specific period, but the early period up to sort of the mid 2000s, I think that's really when they were, yeah, sort of down my alley, up my alley more so. Yeah, and it's a great one. It's off an EP called Fins to Make Us More Fish Like, and I think it's like a 10-inch 3-track EP. It's got this song. There's another sort of one that was new at the time, and there's a re-recording of something that was on the first album. And yeah, I just defy anyone not to sort of want to dance to this one, really.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, this is Liars with Pillars Were Hollow and Filled with Candy, so we tore them down.
Yeah, great title as well.
Cool. Well, yeah, the next one, 80s Matchbox, obviously, they've been like a lot of people's favorites when they've been on the podcast.
Mhm.
This one distilled down to 1 minute 25. Were you like, was there something in shorter songs which were they quite common at the time in terms of like the more like energetic songs type thing?
I think that with 80s Matchbox, yeah, I mean, they, I think there's a good reason that a lot of people have mentioned them on your podcast. They really were like, in that period, that sort of early 2000s period, I guess you'd had the Libs who had sort of just broken, but for people who are into more, I guess, sort of slightly more experimental, heavier music, they just were. There was a period where I just thought they were untouchable, basically. So, I remember the first couple of singles coming out, and then the album, and I think the album is like 22 minutes or something. It's just a blast of. It's just so intense, and they're a band that I think that no one will ever be able to. You could sort of hear where they were coming from. You could hear some of the influences. There was a bit of sort of hardcore punk. There was a bit of rockabilly in there as well. A little sort of bit gothy as well. But even though you could sort of hear where it was coming from, you just couldn't believe, especially live. Again, I've probably seen them 3 or 4 times live. We played with them. We supported them once as well, and when you watch them live, you just couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like blew you to the back of the room, really. And yeah, I mean, maybe there is a lot to be said about their songs being shorter. I mean, there's some normal length songs on the album, but there is a blast of like maybe that's sort of economical. Maybe that's like, well, you know we've said all we want to say, or we've done all we want to done with this song, so we're going to move on to another one. I think maybe there is a lot to be said for that. It doesn't make it okay. Maybe it's not like you're proving how musically minded you are and how many different twists and turns you can put into a song. But at the same time, I mean, you've got to be quite a good songwriter to write a song that's that short and feels complete as well. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they were like, I'm going to gush about all these bands really because I've chosen the ones that I really loved, but they were just incredible. They were incredible. There was that, what wasn't too much of a fan of the second album. Um, and I remember after that, I sort of moved on by then, but that first record, and I think it's going to be the same for a lot of people, that first record distilled a certain period, and as I've said, like that pre-mid 2000s period where sort of anything went a little bit. And, I think they even I don't know if they did chart with that record, but it was, it was massive on the underground scene. Everyone had that album. And, I remember seeing them at the garage around the time of release. I think it might have been slightly before or slightly after, but the garage isn't a particularly big venue, five or 600 maximum really. And we turned up, and I think it was another weird day, like Sunday or Thursday. I don't know, just one of those days where you just cannot be asked to leave the house really. And I remember like they had their old car outside parked up, the 80s Matchbox car. And yeah, I just remember just incredible. I remember Guy just crowd surfing for most of it. And yeah, it's amazing, really. But if anyone hasn't heard this record, you really need to listen to it. It's no joke. It really is a killer.
Okay, nice one. Well, this is 80s Matchbox with Charge the Guns. And yeah, the next one, Whirlwind Heat. I'd heard of these before, and reading up on this song, it sounds like it was recorded by Jack White, I think.
Yeah. Again, another one of those American bands who toured here quite a lot, really, back in the day. Again, I don't really understand where that came from. Jack White did record their early stuff. I think they did some touring with the White Stripes as well, just as they were breaking. And they were on Third Man as well, I think. Again, really, really strange band, very much influenced by Brainiac and Arab on Radar, sort of like, in the same way that the Martinis were. But I mean, they took the guitar out of it altogether, really, because their lineup was, I think it originally had a guitarist. So I think there's a guitarist on this one, not that you'd really be able to tell because it's so mangled. But after that, they just had drums, bass, and singing, and occasional, like the singer would play the keyboard sometimes. And again, I think, I saw those live quite a lot. We supported them live a couple of times as well. And yeah, again, they were just sort of doing something that no one else was at that time. I mean, I guess you had White Stripes doing the two-piece thing, so no bass, and you had the Kills doing the same thing, but you never had it the other way around at that time. I know that Death from Above did it later, and there's quite a few bands. Who was that guy who threw a strop on stage at a festival recently? What are they called? Royal Blood.
All right. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
what you
do you
mean.
remember
Yeah,
that? Did you see that?
yeah, it's a bit David Brent, wasn't it?
Oh God, it's so embarrassing. But yeah, so like that sort of thing now isn't that unusual, but at the time it really was, And I remember, we really used to like them. First album, Do Rabbits Wonder, is amazing. But I remember like the NME, as they did often with a lot of bands, sort of built them up a little bit and knocked them down. And I remember there was a review where it was like, I think it was they played Reading, and they did a review, and it was like, oh, if you got three chimps and gave them instruments, like they'd make a better noise than this or something, something really stupid and really sort of like trying to be edgy or whatever. But this song comes from an EP that came out before that first album. So I think this came out before the White Stripes were particularly big as well. And it has got some guitar in it, but again, like it's just a noise. It's just an amazing noise. But it was produced by Jack White and I think Jim Diamond as well, who was like an engineer who did a lot of those garage bands in that period, like the Dirt Bombs and stuff like that. I might be wrong, but I always thought they were great. I thought they were great. And again, it was I was just the absolute nerds going up to them, telling them how much I loved their music and how important they were to me whenever they'd come to town. And I look back on it and sort of it's quite embarrassing, really. But at the same time, at least I wasn't standing there trying to be Mr. Cool. And yeah, I'm in a band too. Actually, I don't think we need to discuss anything. I loved these guys, and I've loved all these bands, and they were great. And I think that it, as I say, it just shows how that stuff was quite varied in that period. And I'm really glad I got to see these guys as much as I did.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, this is Whirlwind Heat with Valletta. And then next we've got Klang. Is that a band you played with back in the day?
We didn't play with them, but do you know who it is? It's So do you know Elastica?
Yeah.
So it's Donna Matthews, the guitarist from Elastica. It's her band after she left Elastica,
Ah,
basically.
okay, right.
So essentially, I think what happened is she left it. They had some quite bad drug problems, I think, in the late '90s. She left and became like it's really weird. It's like she became like a minister or something, like really heavily religious, and became like a minister or a pastor. I don't really know those terms, but became like a church person.
Mm.
Just disappeared off the face of the earth for a good few years, which is sort of understandable, I guess, if you've gone through the ringer like she did. If there's a way out of that, you're going to take it, aren't you? So I guess if it's finding God or taking heroin, then you're going to try and find God, really, aren't you? But you know, I mean, Alaska were one of my favourite bands of that period, the Britpop period. I hate that word, but whatever. And yeah, when I heard that she'd started up a new band, I was all up for it. Really, I wanted to hear it, and I think it was the only single they did, and they did an album as well. And I don't remember the album being quite as good, but this single's great. It was on Rough Trade or a Rough Trade subsidiary, if I remember rightly. And they never really, I don't think they were in it to sort of become successful or to be well known. I think they were just doing it because maybe just she wanted to get back into music or she missed it or I don't know. But again, I saw them, I've seen them 3 or 4 times, and I don't remember them gigging that much really, and I certainly don't remember them touring. So I saw them at the Buffalo Bar and Metros again and somewhere else, and it was sort of over as soon as it begun. Really, I remember this single coming out and really loving it, and I remember the album coming out, and then that's it. So I think that with bands, I mean, it's not like these other bands where they're starting afresh with people who are unknown to the industry. I mean, she's quite a well-known musician, or she certainly would have been at that period. Post '90s, being in a huge band like Elastica. So maybe she had a different agenda, but I think it's a great song. I mean, it's like a quite new wavy, a bit post-punky, but I remember like most people had a copy of this at the time. So if people don't know it, certainly check it out. Check the album out. No Sound is Heard. I don't think a lot of this stuff's on the internet, so I might have to upload it. But yeah, it's great. Check it out.
Cool. Well, this is Klang with L.O.V.E. or Love. Don't know what they were going for there, but
Either or.
yeah, yeah. And then the next one was another favorite. Quite similar sound in terms of the drums to Selfish Cunt, really. Fat Truckers, Fix It.
Yeah, very much so. Very much down that electronic route. I don't know too much about this band, but I know that a few of them were in. I think one of them might have been in Adento X, or like I don't know, but a few of them were. I think they were slightly older and they were been in bands before, like electronic bands. I don't know too much about that world really, but the reason I love this one so much, and the reason I even know it really is because there's a promoter. I think he's still going, but he was a really, really good underground promoter in London at the time. His name's Sean McCluskey. Someone must have mentioned him on the
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
if I recognize that name.
Yeah, So he used to be in the Subway Sex in the 1980s. He was a drummer, and he used to. He started up this night called Sonic Mook Experiment, and it was going before we started. I think it started off sort of more down the sort of electronic route. And when we started, he was doing a night at the Verge in it wasn't the Verge, it was on the Rocks in Hoxton. And I remember we played a few shows for him, and it was just as this whole type of music in the UK was sort of bubbling up a bit. And I remember he put out this compilation called Sonic Mook Experiment 2. And it was a double album, and everyone had the album. It had the Martinis on it. It had 80s Matchbox. It had loads of quite good electronic sort of electro clash stuff. Had the Buff Medways, Billy Childish's band. Loads and loads of really good music at the time, and quite a varied record as well, quite a good, varied compilation. And this was the first song on the compilation. And because you didn't have streaming then, it would have been 2002 or 2001. You just play the same records. You go out and then you go to someone's house afterwards, and you'd sit up till God knows when, and you'd listen to the same records over and over again, because it was either that or someone might have a mixtape, or you'd have a couple of CDs that probably skipped or whatever. But everyone had this compilation, and it was the first song. So I've probably heard this song more than any other song on the album because it was the first one. And it really is like, it just reminds me of going back to someone's house after a club or after a gig or after whatever, and just, yeah, like carrying on the party. And that was the soundtrack to it, because that's the first song everyone would put on. So, yeah, I mean, I can sort of tell why you like it. And I can tell why you link it to Selfish Cunt a bit, because, yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me a little bit of, that sort of 80s post-punk electronic stuff. And as I say, I don't remember a lot about them. I know they released an album and a few singles, but I think it was more of a project than a band for those guys. As I say, I think a few of them have been in stuff or were in other things at the time. And yeah, it's just great, really, isn't it? But yeah, definitely check out Sonic Mook Experiment 2. I can't remember the actual subtitle of it now, but you won't. It's not online, but you can probably get a copy off Discogs for like a tenner or something.
All right, nice one. Well, this is Fat Truckers with Fix It. And then the next one, Turn Pale, it reminded me a bit of Black Wire type thing. Quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, this is out of all the bands on this list, this is probably a band I know the least about. And the reason I chose it, other than it being great, which it is, the reason I chose it is because it sort of shows how completely obscure bands from another part of the world could still sell records here. I mean, they're American, and again, sort of, I know a lot of people had this single, but it's the only thing I've got by them, and I don't know anything about them. So they just must have had really good distribution or something, a rough trade. Sorry. Or at least someone had sort of taken a shine to the record and decided to put it somewhere good in the racks, or it's like a single of the week in the shop or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I've done a bit of digging online before we did this, just to sort of get my head around what was going on. But I think they're from Indiana, and they did a couple of albums after. I've listened, and they're not bad. It's not as good as this song, and the other side of this single is really good as well, actually. And yeah, Black Wire, I can get that. It's quite dance punky, which was very of the period of that early 2000s thing. But I think it's great. Again, like, they weren't one of the bands that toured the UK at the time. They weren't a band I ever read about in the NME, but yet still, we all ended up with the single somehow. So yeah, I think I've uploaded both sides. I've got like a YouTube thing where I'm uploading music that I can't find on the internet, basically. So stuff that isn't on Spotify, things that I can't find on YouTube. And yeah, if you search it, Turn Pale, Chance, Mesmerize, it will come up. Yeah, it's just great, really. I mean, it's got a bit of chance the side that you're going to play, we've got a bit of pill to it, maybe a bit of pop group. It's that sort of thing. The B side is like sort of gothy flowers of romance era pill, or like the Virgin Prunes or something. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe they had a lot of potential, but obviously they just didn't get the backing that a lot of the other US bands did. But it's great nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here it is. His Turn Pale with Chance. And then, yeah, the next one I definitely heard before on your playlist, I think. Tongue Tied by Errata.
Yeah,
Um, quite a short number,
sorry.
but yeah.
Yeah, they were another band, the American band who came over to the UK a few times. I saw them a few times, and yeah, just I don't know what was going on there. I just unless they were sort of selling records in decent enough quantities to warrant coming and doing a UK tour. But this is from their first album, I think, called it's like Some Other Animals or something about animals. Um, and yeah, again, it was an album I remember everyone had. But yet again, like a lot of these bands, they were completely underground. So I think what changed, after sort of 2005 was that even obscure bands was more sort of mainstream. I don't know whether that was because, you know, labels putting a bit more money into it because it was more of a surefire thing, or whether it was because, I don't know, maybe word of mouth really was that good. But yeah, I mean, they came over, I saw them at Metros. I think that might have been the first night I saw Twisted Charm, but I might be wrong about that. And yeah, brilliant. All female group, and just about as weird and strange as it gets. Really, you can tell there's no what's the word, uh, desire to follow a formula with that band. They were just sort of making it up, not making it up as it went along, but definitely trying not to be conventional with rhythm and melody, and I think it really works. That album's really good. The second album's really, really good too. They were quite big on the underground scene. They never broke through, but I don't know if there's ever a danger of a band like that breaking through. Really, are going to have limited commercial potential, as wanky as that sounds. You can sort of see why the White Stripes would break through, but this wouldn't. But at the same time, I know what I'd rather listen to. And yeah, this was, I got a feeling this might have been on that Sonic Nuke Experiment compilation, or maybe even the one after that. I don't know. But yeah, so I think Black Wire might have been on one of them. Now you say their name. I don't know. Check it out. Write in, people. But yeah, it's great. People, you should listen to their first couple of albums because they really are good. There's some really, really good live footage on YouTube as well. So check it out.
Okay, nice one. Well, here's Errata with Tongue Tied. And then the next one's like a similar ilk, I thought, really. Kaito, Should I?
Yeah, they were a band that, again, we played with a couple of times, got to know quite well, actually. But they were from Norwich. And the singer, Nicky, went on to be in Factory Floor. Do you know those guys?
I don't think so.
Okay, so they're sort of like almost like a house, electronic house thing, but with real instruments. It's quite experimental. Um, they're quite good, but I always prefer Kaito. I mean, you could say that it's more traditional musically, but I remember we played with them at an art rocker night in at the Buffalo Bar in Highbury, and we loaded in, done our sound check. Or no, they were doing their sound check, and I just remember sitting there, just watching them, and just thinking, this is great because it's sort of post punky, but you never got the feeling that they were trying to jump on the bandwagon. It was almost like it was in them anyway, to do that sort of stuff. So it's sort of post punky, but there's a bit of sort of American influence in there. I don't know too much about that style of music, but it sounds a bit, like pavementy in places or whatever. Um, and I just always thought, like, again, great live bands. Saw them a lot, maybe 5, 6, 7 times. Played with them a couple of times. Became quite good friends with them, really. And yeah, they were from Norwich, so I don't know. I don't know if people take bands from Norwich seriously. It was very well. It's like if you're from outside of London, and especially if you were then, it was hard. I mean, we were from like close enough to London that it didn't matter. But a lot of bands, like Black Wire, really. I mean, but I guess they're from Leeds, weren't they?
Yeah, that's where they were based. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it didn't affect them as much. But I remember there was a couple of bands who, from the provinces or from somewhere people hadn't really paid attention to and didn't quite get the attention really. But I think Kaito, they'd been going longer than us. So I think they started I think they was slightly older, started in the mid 90s maybe. Funnily enough, we just recorded our the third Girls and Synthesis album with the producer that did the album. This is from Owen Turner. I don't know if he'll listen to this, but he's great. He's an amazing engineer, and we recorded in Norfolk where they used to record basically. So it's like a huge shed in the middle of nowhere, like literally in the middle of nowhere, and it was great. And the reason we went there is because I remembered that he'd done this record, so I was like, well, I always used to really love the sound of that album. I wonder if the studio's still going. Looked online, it was still going, still the same guy, still the same location, and it was affordable for us, so it was a no-brainer, really. And you definitely got that feel with Kato, where it was like they were also on that DIY thing. It was like it felt. I think they got signed to Mute eventually, but I think this record came out before Mute re-released it. Um, and it definitely has like a slightly scrappy DIY thing to it. Or maybe that's part of the appeal as well. But anyone who hasn't heard this again should go back and listen to it. It's on Spotify. The album's called Band Red, and it's incredible. It really is great. Um, yeah, I don't know really. Great live bands, and yeah, you should all listen to it.
Okay, great. Well, here's Kato with Should I? All right, cheers, John. I thought I'd let you know that Neil Children made Jamie Reynolds' top 10 list the other day with their stupid band.
Oh, did it really? Amazing. Yeah, do you know what? I found something quite interesting about that. The other day, I was watching. There's a couple of old gigs on YouTube, and we were playing that song like a year before it come out, which is weird because I always thought it was like a last minute thing where we just sort of recorded it just as we wrote it. But yeah, it was a year old, which by our standards would have been like years old. So yeah, it's good. I'm glad he enjoyed it. I love Jamie. He's great. He was driving the Violets round when they were supporting us before the Klaxons started, and the Violets are another band. Really, I should have put on the list, but I think that was after 2005, so I didn't quite meet my criteria. But
Yeah, they were on his list
yeah,
actually. Yeah.
were they really?
Yeah.
What one was it? Was it Mirror Mirror? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, and he was great. He kept losing his camera. He had a camera with him, like a really posh camera. And my granddad was driving us around, and he used to be the manager of the band. And he kept putting his camera down and leaving it. And my granddad would just take it and wait for him to realise that he'd lost his camera again. And he'd go, "Fucking hell, has anyone seen my camera?" And my granddad would go, "What? You mean this camera?" It was like every day. I like unbelievably. Yeah, I don't know. He's just drunk, I think. But I'll tell you what, I've got a quick question. I don't know if you want to do this or whether we're going to be over time or whatever, but it's up to you. I didn't think before I sent you this list, but we're going to be re-releasing that. Well, we're going to be releasing that Neil Children album, finally, the unreleased one, this year. So I don't know if you want me to send you a track and it can be like an exclusive thing, like the first time anyone's ever heard it or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we could do that another time if you want. It's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm easy, man. I mean, if you've got enough time on this one, that would be great because obviously
Oh, yeah,
people are going
fits
to
in
be
well. Yeah.
listening to it exactly. But it's up to you. How do you think you are on time?
Yeah, yeah. Let's just do it. I don't think it's pretty flexible to be fair.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, I tell you what. I'll send you. Let me just have a look because I'll send you one that hasn't been. Um, that hasn't been released in any other format. So there's no point to do that. I'll comment on it and see. Right. Okay, all right. I'll tell you what. We'll do a track called Window Shopping.
Okay, cool.
I'll send it to you tonight. But yeah, I don't know if you want to do the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
thing of like, yeah, okay, cool. All right, go for it.
yeah. So you just said you kindly give it us an exclusive of a new Neil's Children's song, John. Like, what can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of like the more hardcore fans will know that we made an album in 2006, I think it was, that never got released. Well, I think we spoke about it on your last podcast that we did with you in the pandemic, and due to sort of issues with the record company and various boring things, it just didn't come out. But we've managed to actually get the permission to release it, which we're planning to do this year, by the label from the period. So yeah, I thought as I was, speaking to you today, it is out of my criteria of 2005, annoyingly, but I think I can make an exception this time. Yeah, it's called Window Shopping, and it was quite a live favourite of the time. But this version's never been heard since we recorded it. Essentially, we will be uploading this album this year at some point, and I think it's sort of a bit of a holy grail for some fans, because I think there was maybe some promo CDs of it floating about at the time, but it just didn't come out at the time. So yeah, it was a live favorite, and now I look back on the album, it's actually pretty good. So yeah, I'm pleased to share it with you.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I guess that's a good finishing point then. Well, this is Neil's Children with Window Shopping. All right, nice one, John. Where's the best
Amazing.
place for people to keep up with stuff? Is it your Instagram or the different
So
Instagrams? Or...
I think there's a Neil's Children one. I don't know. Let me have a look. Hang on one sec. So I guess the best thing to do would be for like the Neil's Children one and the Girls in Synthesis one. So the Girls in Synthesis one is girls.in.synthesis, and the Neil's Children one is just Neil's Children, actually.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I don't think there's been anything posted for a while, but oh yeah, happy birthday to me last year, brilliant. So yeah, but I'll let you know when the album's coming out, and I'll send you the tracks in case you want to play anyone. It's actually, as I say, it's actually far better than I remember, but I don't think my issue was a musical issue. I think it was all the other nonsense that went on at the time, really. So you know
Yeah,
how it
fair.
is.
Oh, do you reckon you'll play live with Neil's Children again then?
I can't see it, not at the
Okay.
moment. Never say never, but I just don't think. You know what? I'd be worried about not being able to capture what it was about in the first place. And when you go and see a band and it doesn't quite hit the nail on the head, I think for me to want to do it, we'd need to have one of the original bassists back in the band, either James or Keith, and I just cannot see that happening, basically. And I'm busy with GIS and stuff, but I still love what we did in Golden Synthesis. So I still want to try and make everything available to everyone. So I think that for the moment, that's probably as good as it's going to get.